My cousin Nate is in the Coast Guard, and he has been for over a decade. He's not the kind of guy to lie or make things up. He's one of the most straightforward people I know. Real grounded and not superstitious, not into horror, just a practical guy who likes boats and order. He told me this story in the summer of 2022. He proceeded to tell me 3 accounts, not ghost stories. He was adamant about that. He called them personnel issues, things that happened to real people, real keepers, and contractors who went out to these isolated rocks and saw things that broke them. This happened back in 2015, when I was 24 and drowning in student debt after dropping out of an engineering program. So when a family friend said his maritime restoration crew needed an extra set of hands for a quick job offshore, I took it. It didn't matter what it was. I just needed money. The place was a spark plug style lighthouse called Needle Rock. I've changed the name, but if you're familiar with New England's older stations, you can probably guess it. The tower sits 6 miles out, no land around it, just a rusted iron cylinder bolted into open Atlantic water. No beach, no rocks, no tiny maintenance island. Just metal, ocean, and the kind of wind that never stops screaming. My crew consisted of 3 people. Logan, the foreman, old, stubborn, and allergic to nonsense. 30 years in the industry, and not a single ghost story in him. Miller, late 20s, twitchy, paranoid, constantly checking his phone despite 0 signal. And me, broke, inexperienced, and trying to pretend I wasn't already horrified by the idea of being trapped on a metal tube in the middle of the ocean. When the drop-off boat left us on that narrow gangway, I swear my stomach sank along with it. The moment the engine noise faded, the silence of the ocean hit me heavy, unnatural, like being swallowed. Inside, Needle Rock felt worse. The place echoed with every wave, every creak. The smell was a mix of diesel, mildew, and old seawater. 4 levels: generator room, galley, bunk room, and at the top, the lantern room, decommissioned and locked. "Storm's coming Thursday," Logan barked, tossing his bag onto a moldy cot. "We get the exterior scraped and primed before that. 12-hour shifts. No whining." For 2 days, nothing happened. The monotony almost made the place feel normal. Almost. Then, Wednesday night came. By dusk, the sky was a sick purple, the air unnaturally heavy. The wind wasn't just whistling, it was moaning through the gaps in the iron, long and low, like something alive. We ate canned stew in the galley. Miller couldn't sit still. "This place isn't safe," he said, tapping his spoon nonstop. "This storm's gonna be bad. We should leave now." Logan didn't even glance at him. "Sit. Eat." "I'm serious. The whole tower shakes when the big waves hit. Listen to that." Logan sighed, finally meeting his eyes. "It's stood since 1902. It'll be here in the morning. Calm down." I agreed with Miller quietly. The place felt wrong, like the ocean itself didn't want us there. That night, I woke to the wind, shrieking through the tower. But that wasn't what pulled me from sleep. It was the sound of footsteps, heavy boots on iron stairs. Fast, urgent, but they weren't coming from below. They were above me. Above the bunk room was only the locked lantern room. I sat up, heart thudding in my throat. "Miller?" I whispered into the dark. Nothing. The footsteps stopped directly overhead, so close I could almost feel them through the mattress. Then something scraped across the floor above us. A long, heavy drag. Metal on metal. That was enough. I shook Logan awake. "Listen," I whispered. We froze. 10 seconds. 20. Then, Logan muttered, "Probably a loose pane in the lantern room." "No," I said. "Miller's gone." Logan climbed to the hatch with me. The padlock was still in place. The hasp was secure. There was no way Miller or anyone had opened it. But when we went downstairs looking for him, he wasn't in the galley. Not in the generator room. Not in the storage locker. Not in the tiny bathroom. Needle Rock has one exit, the main steel door. It was locked. From the inside, meaning Miller didn't leave. Meaning he was still in the tower. But he wasn't. When we returned to the lantern room hatch, Logan's hands trembled as he unlocked it. The moment the door cracked open, freezing wind blasted in storm air, and the floor was covered in wet, naked footprints. Oily, black, smelling like rotten seawater. They crisscrossed the room, pacing in frantic circles. And scratched into the brass housing of the old light was a message that looked like it had been carved with bare fingernails. "He is outside." Before we could even process that, Logan swept his flashlight across the glass wall of the lantern room, out onto the narrow exterior walkway. And there he was, Miller, naked, blue, clinging to the railing in the storm. His skin looked like it had been soaking in cold water for days. He was screaming something, but the wind stole his voice. Then the light caught his face. His eyes were gone, both sockets empty, leaking blood down his cheeks in thin, wavering streams. I staggered back, choking on my own breath. Logan ripped the latch on the external door, yelling for Miller to grab his hand. Miller turned toward us. He smiled, a wide, slack, unnatural smile. When he spoke, it wasn't a scream, it was a calm, conversational tone that cut straight through the storm. "He's not outside anymore. He's in the hatch." Then Miller stepped backward into the void. Just stepped off. Gone. Logan and I stood frozen, soaked, shaking. Then, behind us, from the hatch we had just climbed through, the padlock had snapped shut. Someone had locked us out, on the gallery, 80 feet above freezing water, in the storm, with no way down. And whatever had taken Miller was now inside the lighthouse. The wind was strong enough to rip the breath straight from my lungs. Rain hammered my face like gravel. For a few seconds, Logan and I didn't move. We just stared at that closed hatch, the padlock glinting in the lantern light like an eye staring back at us. Whoever locked it had been in the lantern room with us, and we never saw them. Logan snapped out of it first. He lunged at the glass, swinging the heavy wrench from his tool belt. Hurricane-strength panes don't break easily. The first hit sent a shockwave up his arm, and the second barely made a crack. "Again!" I shouted over the storm. He swung a third time, a fourth. On the fifth, the glass finally gave out, collapsing inward in a shower of razor-sharp shards. We crawled through the broken window, bleeding from cuts on our hands and knees, but at least we were out of the wind. The lantern room felt dead quiet compared to the gallery, just the low groaning of the tower and the storm hammering the outside walls. I kept staring at the hatch. The thought that something had walked up behind us and locked it without a sound made my stomach twist. We get down, get the main door sealed, and we wait until morning. Logan said, pale but steady. Nothing else. But when he tried the hatch, it held. The padlock was definitely latched from below. Someone had physically closed it on us. It took us nearly 20 minutes to pry the hinge pins loose using the wrench and a screwdriver. 20 minutes of kneeling above that black hole, imagining something staring up at us from the dark, waiting. When the final pin came free, the hatch sagged open with a metallic groan. The spiral staircase below was pitch black. No emergency lights, no generator hum, just empty darkness disappearing downward. We descended. Each step echoed too loudly. The air changed. The deeper we went, heavier, thick with the smell of diesel and something coppery. I kept expecting a hand to reach up through the grating and grab my ankle. The bunk room was the first sign that whatever was in the lighthouse hadn't stopped at Miller. It was destroyed. Mattresses slashed open, stuffing scattered everywhere. Our bags turned inside out. Clothing shredded. The tiny round windows smeared with something black and greasy handprints that looked dragged downward. "This wasn't wind," I whispered. "No," Logan said, voice shaking. We pushed downward to the galley. The copper smell was stronger here. The overturned table, the scattered cans, the streaks of something black on the curved wall. It all looked wrong. Not vandalism, not anger, more like desperation or hunger. "We're getting to the door," Logan said. Now. The bottom-level generator room and main exit was chaos. The generator sputtered like it was suffocating. Diesel fuel pooled across the floor, and the heavy steel main door, the one we had checked before, locked tight, was now standing wide open, letting rain and seawater blast inside. "He left," I said, adrenaline surging with a wave of relief. "The intruder left. He jumped or ran out. He's gone." Logan stepped toward the door, shining his flashlight into the storm. "Gone," he said. "No footprints. No boat. He must have jumped like Miller." He shoved the door closed and spun all 3 wheel locks tight. We were sealed in, and for the first time, we relaxed just a little. Not much, but enough to let the shaking in our hands fade. "We stay here until daylight," Logan said. "We sit with our backs to this door and don't move." So that's what we did. We climbed onto a heavy tool chest, with our backs pressed against the steel, clutching cold metal wrenches like weapons. Every slam of a wave against the tower made my heart lurch. Every groan of the structure sounded like footsteps above us. Hours passed like that, silent, frozen, listening. I kept thinking about the hatch beneath our feet, the one accessing the ballast tank under the generator room. A space we never used. A space I didn't even know existed until later. At dawn, the storm finally weakened. The lighthouse stopped shuddering and the wind calmed to a low moan. Around 7 a.m., the distant thump of helicopter blades echoed across the water. We were saved. 2 hours later, I was on land, wrapped in a blanket, shaking like a leaf as the Coast Guard asked us questions. Logan handled most of the talking. I just kept replaying that moment Miller's voice, saying, "He's not outside anymore. He's in the hatch." 3 days later, they found Miller's body washed ashore 5 miles away. They listed the causes drowning and trauma from the fall. But the autopsy added something else. He had gouged his own eyes out before dying. When the investigation team searched Needle Rock, they found no sign of an intruder. No footprints on the gangway. No sign of a boat approaching. No trace of anyone except us. But they did find something. Under a rubber mat in the generator room, directly beneath the spot where Logan and I sat all night, there was a bolted maintenance hatch. When they opened it, they found a nest, shredded insulation, rotting rags, hundreds of fish bones, a stench so foul, one investigator vomited. Someone had been living in that ballast tank for months, but there was no exit, no ladder, no route to the ocean, no tunnel to the outside. Only the hatch in the generator room floor. The hatch we sat on all night, meaning whoever was underneath heard every word we said, every breath, every whisper. The final detail, the one that hollowed me out, came from a state police inspector a week later. He told me the padlock on the lantern room hatch, the one that locked us outside, had no fingerprints on it. Not one, not mine, not Logan's. It was wiped clean. But the underside of that hatch, the metal we forced open, had deep gouges carved into it. Someone had clawed at it with desperate, brutal strength. They found fragments of fingernails embedded in the scratches. They weren't Miller's, or Logan's, or mine. They were old, caked with rust, rot, and oily black grease, the kind of grime you get from living in a wet, metal coffin. Needle Rock was fully automated 2 months later. Nobody mans it anymore. No crew goes out. The Coast Guard says it's safer that way. But sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment, when the building settles or a pipe clicks, I hear a sound that takes me straight back to that night, the sound of a padlock snapping shut. And I remember that while we shivered in the dark, clinging to each other, the thing we feared outside was directly beneath our feet. Nate grabbed another beer from the cooler. The air on the porch had cooled down, the crickets getting louder. He looked unsettled by his own story, rubbing the back of his neck. "That wasn't the worst one," he said quietly. "The worst ones aren't the violent ones. They're the ones where nothing makes sense." He leaned forward. "This next one happened to a guy I went to academy with. Let's call him Elias. Elias was stationed out in the Pacific Northwest, up near the Washington-Canada border. Fog country. The kind of fog that doesn't burn off until noon, if at all. In 2018, Elias was doing a solo rotation on a shore-based lighthouse. It wasn't offshore like Needle Rock. It was on a jagged promontory connected to the mainland by a thin strip of gravel road that flooded at high tide. It was remote, surrounded by miles of dense pine forest on one side and the violent Pacific on the other. Elias was the calm thinker type. He read philosophy books, practiced meditation, and actually enjoyed the solitude. He wasn't easily rattled. He didn't believe in monsters. His job was mainly security and maintenance. The light was automated, but the facility had a fog signal, a massive diaphone horn that blasted every 30 seconds when visibility dropped. It was November. The fog had rolled in thick, a wall of white cotton that swallowed sound and light. Elias had been there for 2 weeks without seeing another soul. The trouble started on a Tuesday night. Elias was in the keeper's quarters, a small cottage detached from the tower. He was reading, a cup of tea on the table. The foghorn was booming rhythmically in the distance. Silence. You get used to the sound. Your brain filters it out. But around 11 p.m., during the 27 seconds of silence between blasts, Elias heard something else. It was a whistle, not the wind. It was a melodic, human whistle, a cheerful, lilting tune, like something a 1,950 seconds milkman would whistle. It was drifting in from the fog, somewhere near the edge of the cliff. Elias put his book down. He wasn't scared, just confused. The nearest town was 20 miles away. The access road was underwater due to the tide. He went to the window, cupping his hands against the glass. Pitch black and white mist. Whistle. It was getting closer. He grabbed his heavy flashlight and his radio. He put on his coat and stepped out onto the porch. "Hello?" he called out. "This is U.S. Coast Guard property. Identify yourself." The whistling stopped instantly. The silence that followed was heavy. Then, the foghorn blasted BLAAART, making Elias jump. When the echo faded, the whistling started again. But this time, it wasn't a tune. It was a mimicry. The whistler was imitating the foghorn. A low, raspy, two-note whistle. Hoo-hoo. Elias frowned. "Look, if you're hiking and got stuck, come to the light. I have a radio." No answer. Just the sound of gravel crunching. Slow, deliberate footsteps walking around the perimeter of the cottage. Elias unclipped the pepper spray from his belt. He walked down the porch steps, sweeping the beam of light through the mist. The beam just terminated in white nothingness 10 feet away. "I'm warning you," Elias shouted. The footsteps stopped. They were right around the corner of the house. Elias rounded the corner, light raised, ready to confront a lost hiker or a drunk kid. There was no one there. The gravel was undisturbed. The wet grass showed no footprints. Elias felt a prickle on the back of his neck. He circled the entire cottage. Nothing. He checked the locking mechanism on the tower door. Secure. He went back inside, locking the deadbolt behind him. Animals, he told himself. Wind in the eaves. He sat back down. But he didn't read. He listened. An hour later, the whistling returned. This time, it was right outside the front door. Loud. Piercing. It was whistling Yankee Doodle. Elias was a brave guy, but this felt wrong. It felt mocking. He moved to the door, looked through the peephole. Nothing but gray, swirling fog. He grabbed the handle, ripped the door open, and shone the light. "Get out of here!" Empty. But as he stood there, heart hammering, he looked down at the welcome mat on the porch. There was a gift. Sitting perfectly in the center of the mat was a dead seagull. But it wasn't just dead, it had been, arranged. Its wings were neatly folded, its beak was tied shut with a piece of red fishing line, and its eyes had been replaced with 2 small, polished gray stones. Elias slammed the door and locked it. He backed away, the image of the bird burning into his mind. That wasn't an animal, that was a person. A person who could move silently and vanish into the fog. He radioed the station on the mainland. "Station, this is Light 4. I have a prowler. Requesting assistance." The radio crackled with static. "Light 4. Station. Copy prowler. Be advised, tide is high. Road is impassable. We can't get a unit out there until 0600. Are you in immediate danger?" I don't know," Elias said. "Someone is playing games. Lock down, Elias. Use your sidearm if they breach. We'll be there at first light." Elias didn't have a sidearm, just the pepper spray and a flare gun. He spent the next 3 hours sitting in the corner of the living room, watching the door. The foghorn kept blasting. At 3 a.m., the power went out. The cottage went pitch black. The hum of the refrigerator died, but the foghorn, which ran on the main generators in the tower, kept going. Elias fumbled for his flashlight. He turned it on, the beam cutting a dusty cone in the dark room. Then he heard it. It was coming from the window behind him. He spun around. The curtains were drawn. He watched as a long, thin object pressed against the fabric from the outside, tracing a line down the glass. "I'm armed," Elias lied, his voice cracking. The scratching stopped. Then, a voice spoke. It didn't shout. It spoke in a calm, flat monotone, pressing its lips right against the glass. "Elias," the voice said. "The fog is getting in." Elias froze. He hadn't told anyone his name. He was just Light 4 on the radio. "Who are you?" Elias whispered. "Open the window, Elias. I want to show you what I found in the water." "Go away." "It floats, Elias. We all float out here." Elias backed into the kitchen, grabbing a butcher knife. "I'm calling the police." "The lines are cut, Elias. And the radio is in the tower. You're in the house." Elias looked at the radio on his belt. It was dead. Static. "You have to come out sometime," the voice crooned. "The generator needs fuel." That was true. The foghorn was still sounding, but without the secondary fuel pump engaged, which had to be done manually, it would die in an hour. If the horn died, ships would crash. That was the job. But there was no way Elias was going out there. Then, the whistling started again. But this time, it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the basement. The blood froze in Elias's veins. The whistling wasn't coming from outside anymore. It was coming from beneath the floorboards. It was muffled, resonant, and unmistakably rising up through the vents. It was Yankee Doodle again, but slow, taunting. Elias stared at the door to the basement. It was a narrow wooden door in the kitchen, secured only by a simple latch. In older keepers' cottages, the basements were often root cellars with dirt floors, sometimes connected to the sea caves by old drainage tunnels, or Prohibition-era smuggling routes that had long been bricked up, or so the manuals said. He backed away, his eyes fixed on the latch. Heavy boots on wooden stairs. Someone was walking up from the dark. Elias didn't try to be a hero. He didn't yell. The primal instinct to survive overrode everything else. He grabbed a heavy oak chair from the dining table and jammed it under the doorknob of the basement door, wedging it against the floor. A second later, the doorknob turned. It rattled violently. Then, a heavy weight slammed against the wood from the other side. The chair groaned, sliding an inch across the linoleum, but it held. "Elias." The voice came through the door. It sounded muffled, like the speaker had their mouth pressed against the cracks in the wood. "That's not polite. I brought you a gift." "Who are you?" Elias screamed, his voice raw. "I'm the keeper," the voice said. It was devoid of emotion. Flat. "I've been keeping for a long time. You're just the visitor." Then came a sound that broke Elias. It was the sound of a key sliding into a lock. Elias realized with a jolt of horror that he didn't have the key to the basement. It hung on a hook by the back door. He looked at the hook. It was empty. The lock on the basement door clicked. The knob turned again. The intruder pushed. The chair creaked, bowing under the pressure. The door cracked open 2 inches. Through the gap, Elias saw a sliver of a face. Pale, wet skin. One eye that seemed too wide, staring unblinkingly. And the smell of rotting kelp and old stale sweat filled the kitchen. Elias turned and ran. He fumbled with the deadbolt on the front door, threw it open, and sprinted out into the fog. The cold air hit his lungs like broken glass. The visibility was 0, maybe 3 feet. He couldn't see the lighthouse tower, but he knew where it was. He knew he had to get to the steel door of the tower. It was the only thing that could stop this maniac. He ran blindly across the gravel. The foghorn sounded deafeningly loud from the tower ahead. The vibration shook the ground. "For Pry, and a Y. We have dated 2000. Okay." As the echo died, he heard it. It was behind him, close, and then to his left, and then, impossibly, from in front of him. The acoustics of the fog were throwing the sound everywhere. He was being hunted by sound. Elias tripped over a pile of driftwood, scraping his hands raw, but scrambled up instantly. He saw the dull pulse of the lighthouse beacon above him in the mist. He lunged for the steel door at the base of the tower. He punched in the keypad code with trembling fingers. 1985. The light turned green. The solenoid clicked. He wrenched the door open, threw himself inside, and slammed it shut, engaging the throw bolts. He collapsed on the metal grating of the entryway, gasping for air, clutching his chest. He was safe. The tower was impenetrable. He lay there for an hour, listening. He heard nothing but the mechanical rhythm of the fog signal machinery. Eventually, adrenaline gave way to exhaustion. He climbed the spiral stairs to the lantern room, needing to be as high up as possible. He locked the hatch. He sat by the lens, watching the white void of the fog swirl against the glass. He waited for sunrise. When the sun finally burned through the mist, around 10 a.m., the police boat arrived. Elias watched them dock from the gallery railing. He didn't come down until he saw 3 armed officers standing at the base of the tower. They swept the island. They swept the cottage. They found the basement door open. The chair had been snapped in half, but the basement was empty. However, they found the entry point. In the corner of the dirt cellar, behind a stack of old paint cans, the brickwork of an old drainage tunnel had been picked away. It led down into the sea caves below the cliffs. It was a tight squeeze, wet and jagged. The police found a campsite in the caves. Cans of beans, stolen from the cottage pantry, a sleeping bag made of stolen wool blankets, and on the walls of the cave, written in charcoal, were lists, dates, times, weather conditions, and names. Elias. 11 p.m. T. 11:15 p.m. Reading. Elias. 2 a.m. Sleeping. Mouth open. The intruder hadn't just arrived that night. He had been watching Elias for the entire 2 weeks. But the worst part, the part that made Elias quit the Coast Guard and move to a landlocked state, was what they found on his phone. Elias had left his phone on the charger in the kitchen when he ran. The police checked it for evidence. In the camera roll, there were 3 new photos taken that night. The first was a blurry picture of the back of Elias's head while he was reading in the armchair. The second was a close-up of Elias sleeping in his bed, taken from directly above him. The third was a selfie. It was taken in the dark, illuminated only by the phone's screen. It showed a man's face. He was gaunt, his skin peeling from exposure to salt and wind. His teeth were filed into sharp points. He was smiling, and he was wearing Elias's spare uniform jacket. They never caught the Whistler. The caves connected to a network that ran for miles along the coast. He just vanished back into the fog. But Nate told me that sometimes, when the fog rolls in on that part of the coast, the new keepers still report hearing a tune drifting on the wind. Yankee Doodle. Whistled, slow and low, like a lullaby. Most people think the scariest part of working remote stations is the isolation. The waves, the storms, the idea of being trapped miles offshore with no backup. But according to my friend Nate, the real danger is assuming the person beside you is actually a person. He told me this story on a porch last summer. A beer dangling from his hand. His face darkened by the kind of memory that doesn't fade. He said it happened in the winter of 2021 at an offshore light station in the middle of Lake Superior, a place known for swallowing ships whole and freezing bodies so perfectly they look waxed. The rotation was simple. Just 2 men on station for 3 weeks. My friend's buddy, Jack, was the rookie. The other man, Sam, was a lifer, late 50s, gray-bearded, calm in the way only someone who spent decades staring down freezing storms could be. A helicopter dropped them onto the crib light, a concrete bunker rising from a rocky shoal, miles from the nearest shore. The moment the chopper lifted off, it was just Jack and Sam against the lake. The first week was quiet, routine. But Jack noticed something odd. Sam would talk to the radio when it was switched off. Not like he was joking, not like he was delusional, more like he was responding to someone. Little phrases like, "Yeah, I see it. Not yet. Still watching. 99. Jack brushed it off. Isolation makes people weird. But the real trouble started on the 8th day, when a massive storm pinned them inside. The temperature dropped to 20 below. Ice coated the entire structure, windows, doors, even the internal seams, sealing them inside what Jack later described as a frozen tomb. On the second night of the storm, Jack took mid-watch around 3 a.m. He was alone in the galley, making coffee when Sam walked in. Only something was wrong. Sam was drenched, not just wet soaked to the bone, water streaming off him, forming a spreading puddle on the linoleum. He was wearing full heavy weather gear, parka, waterproof pants, boots, clothing no one would casually put on inside. Jack stared at him. "Sam, where the hell have you been? The doors are frozen shut." Sam didn't answer right away. He moved stiffly to the sink, filled a glass, and drank with shaking hands. His skin looked pale, almost translucent, like he'd been submerged in ice water for hours. His lips were blue. "Checked the ice," Sam rasped. "The light is dimming. Fix the generator." Then he walked past Jack, trailing frozen puddles behind him, and vanished into his bunk room. But Jack knew the generator was fine. The lights weren't dimming, and the blast door, the only way outside, was encased in inches of internal frost. Nobody could have opened it. Nobody could have returned through it without breaking the ice seal. He checked the puddle Sam left behind. The water was murky, filled with silt, bits of dead lakeweed, and it smelled like the bottom of a stagnant bay. That's when Jack felt the first real jolt of fear. He walked to the bunk room door and knocked. "Sam, you okay?" Nothing. He pushed the door open. The room was empty. No dripping gear, no wet footprints, bed perfectly made. Sam was gone. Jack ran up the spiral stairs to the lantern room and nearly collapsed. Sam was sitting in the watch chair, wearing pajamas and a warm sweater, reading a paperback like he'd been there for hours. He looked up calmly. "What's wrong? You look like you saw a ghost." Jack couldn't form words. You were just in the galley, completely soaked." Sam raised an eyebrow, tapping the open logbook. "I've been up here all night, kid. You need sleep." In fact, Jack looked at him at his completely dry clothes, his relaxed posture, and forced himself to leave. But when he returned to the galley, the damp spot was still on the floor. The rag he used to clean up the puddle was still stained with silt, and the smell of stagnant lake water still lingered. By the next day, the storm worsened. Ice sealed every window, cutting them off from natural light. The whole station glowed with an eerie yellow haze from the artificial bulbs. Silence pressed in on Jack like a weight. He tried to stay close to Sam, but Sam changed. First, he began forgetting basic things: where the mugs were, which way the doors opened, even words he'd been using for decades. Then his speech shifted. Sam normally spoke with a thick upper Michigan accent. But sometimes, mid-sentence, his voice would flatten, cold, monotone, almost mechanical. One night during dinner, Jack asked him to pass the salt. Sam lifted the shaker slowly, turning it in his hands, like a scientist examining an alien object. "Sodium chloride," Sam muttered. "Preservative." Jack froze, mid-bite. "You all right?" Sam smiled, but it wasn't a real smile, just muscles pulling skin. "I am functioning within normal parameters." Jack pushed back from the table. "I'm calling the base. You need medical help." He took a step toward the comms room, but Sam's hand shot out across the table and clamped onto his wrist. The grip was impossibly strong, crushing, and Sam's skin was ice cold. "The radio is broken," he said. His voice had dropped an octave. "No one can hear you." Rassened, Jack ripped his arm free and bolted into the radio room, slamming and locking the door. He grabbed the mic. "Station Marquette, this is Superior Light. Mayday. Static." He checked the cables. His stomach dropped. The antenna wire had been chewed through. Not cut chewed. Teeth marks in the rubber. Copper strands frayed like something had gnawed them from the inside. Then he heard it. Not Sam shouting. Not fists pounding on the metal, but bones shifting, skin stretching, something wet, rearranging itself. "Jack." Sam's voice came through the door. Except it wasn't just Sam's voice. It sounded like multiple voices layered together. A man. A woman. A child. Something else. Deeper and aquatic. "Let me in," it whispered. "I can't hold this shape much longer. The skin is too tight." Jack backed away, grabbing the emergency fire axe. His hands were trembling so hard the blade clattered against the bracket. "Go away," he yelled. "I'm armed." A wet splat hit the floor outside, then a dragging noise. "We don't need the door, Jack," the voice gurgled. "There are vents. There are pipes. We are fluid." He looked up at the vent above him, only 6 inches wide, but suddenly large enough to terrify. He couldn't stay. Not in that room. Not with something that could melt itself through metal ducts. He unlocked the door, burst into the hallway, and ran. The floor was coated in a trail of thick, translucent slime, leading deeper into the station. Jack didn't follow it. He sprinted for the stairs, climbing toward the lantern room, the highest, most defensible place in the structure. He slammed the hatch behind him and locked it tight. For the moment, he was safe. But safety on Lake Superior never lasts. Jack's breath fogged the freezing air of the lantern room. The storm outside hammered the glass so hard he could feel the vibration in the floorboards. The ice-caked windows blocked almost everything, but through a small, clear patch, he spotted something on the exterior gallery. A figure, just standing there. Jack moved closer and froze. It was Sam, or rather, something wearing Sam. The thing stood motionless on the gallery catwalk, its skin gray and bloated like a drowned corpse. Patches of flesh hung loose, sliding against the winter wind. Its eyes were wrong, huge, black, glossy, like the eyes of a deep-water fish that had never seen sunlight. The creature pressed a webbed hand against the storm glass. A smear of dark water streaked down the pane. Jack raised the flare gun, his hand trembling. "Back up," he shouted. The creature smiled, and that smile wasn't human. It stretched too far, tearing at the corners of its mouth until black water streamed out. "You think fire hurts us?" The words didn't travel through the storm glass. They slid into his mind, cold and slick. "We are the lake. The lake puts out all fires." Then it collapsed. Not fell, collapsed. Like its bones turned to liquid. Sam's shape disintegrated into a gray, sludgy puddle that slopped onto the metal grating, then began sliding across the catwalk. The storm winds should have blown it off the platform, but it moved with purpose like a living shadow. And then Jack saw the gap, the tiny seam under the gallery door. No. The slime seeped through the gap and dribbled onto the lantern room floor, sizzling as it hit the warmer air. Jack stumbled backward, choking on terror. The puddle began to rise. It spun, thickened, changed shape, forming a faceless, humanoid silhouette. No eyes, no mouth. Just a tall, shifting mass of lake muck, its surface bubbling like boiling tar. Jack fired. The flare streaked across the room and struck the creature square in the chest, burning bright magnesium red. The creature shrieked a sound that made Jack's ears ring and his stomach twist. It recoiled, sizzling as the flare burned into it. Jack didn't wait to see what came next. He grabbed a heavy brass oil can, hurled it, then sprinted for the hatch. He unlocked it with shaking hands, threw it open, and practically fell down the spiral stairs. He needed somewhere defensible, somewhere with tools, somewhere with electricity. He ran downward past the bunks, past the galley, past the comms room, all the way to the lowest level, the intake room. Down here, the cold was worse. The concrete walls were rimed with frost. In the middle of the room was the intake pool, a square opening in the floor where lake water surged violently with the waves. Jack pressed himself into a corner, clutching the empty flare gun like a useless talisman. His breath came in shallow gasps. His heartbeat thudded so hard it hurt. Above him, something sloshed on the stairwell. The creature was coming. Jack scanned the room wildly, searching for anything, any advantage. His eyes landed on the massive main breaker panel, bolted to the wall. Thick electrical cables ran from it along the ceiling. A metal pry bar leaned nearby, half frozen into a puddle of ice. And the floor was wet. Water from the storm had seeped down through the structure. There was nearly an inch of film across the concrete. A conductive path. Jack swallowed hard. Please let this work. The creature reached the bottom of the stairs. It had reshaped itself into Sam again, but the illusion was falling apart. The neck stretched too long. The arms hung limply past the knees. The skin shimmered like thin, wet latex struggling to hold something underneath. "Jack," it crooned. "Why do you run?" "We only want to share the silence." Jack stepped closer to the breaker, keeping his eyes locked on the thing. "You're the lake, right?" His voice cracked. "You like the water?" The creature smiled, a horrific, distorted curve. We are everything beneath. It took another step. Jack hurled the empty flare gun at its head. The creature caught it effortlessly, wrong reflexes. Too fast, too fluid. But in that instant, Jack lunged toward the breaker. He ripped the safety cover off the bus bars, exposing the live electrical points, and kicked the metal pry bar so it fell across the open wires and the water-slicked floor. The world exploded. A blinding flash of blue-white lightning blasted across the wet concrete. The shockwave punched through the air. Electricity arced along the floor in wild, spider-webbing tendrils. The creature screamed, not a human scream, not an animal scream, but the sound of something massive and ancient being torn apart. The sound rattled the walls and shattered the hanging bulbs overhead. Sam's shape dissolved instantly, collapsing into a boiling mass of black slime. It convulsed, sparks tearing through it, steam blasting off its surface. The lake water entity writhed violently, shriveling and expanding in rapid pulses. Then it stumbled backward and fell into the intake pool. There was a violent churning, a burst of black ink swirling in the freezing water. And then, like a plug being pulled, the mass was sucked downward, out into the endless, freezing depths of Lake Superior. The lights popped, the breaker sparked, and the station went completely dark. Jack collapsed onto the dry patch of concrete, shivering, barely conscious. He didn't remember passing out. He woke up 2 days later in a Coast Guard rescue chopper. They found him hypothermic, starving, barely alive, clutching an axe like he'd welded it to his hands. His official statement was simple. Sam must have gone outside to check the ice and slipped into the lake during the storm. The Coast Guard accepted it. It happens more often than people realize. But the truth, the real truth, came from Jack's mouth only once, after 4 glasses of whiskey with Nate. The Coast Guard did a standard sweep of the station before leaving. They checked every room, every hatch. In the lowest level, the bilge area, they found the freshwater cistern lid unscrewed. Inside the tank, floating face up, was a body. Sam. Not recently dead, but long dead. The coroner estimated at least 10 days. Jack had only been on station for 8, which meant the Sam he'd flown in with, the Sam he'd eaten with, the Sam he'd slept across the hall from, was never Sam. The real Sam had been dead in that tank before the helicopter even arrived. Something else had been waiting for Jack, wearing Sam's face like a wetsuit. Jack never returned to the Great Lakes. He moved to Arizona, the driest place he could find. Nate says Jack looks normal now. He owns a small house, works a desk job, keeps out of trouble. But whenever it rains, whenever water pools in the gutters, Jack goes still. He watches the puddles form. He watches the water move, like he's waiting to see it stand up, waiting to hear it whisper his name, waiting for the lake to come claim what it started.